Let's rewind the clock a bit. The year is 2007. You've just gotten home from school, and instead of doing homework, because fuck that shit, you opt to boot up your Windows XP computer, or Xbox 360, or PS3, or whatever way you prefer to play games. Ping the boys on Vent, or shoot out some messages on Xbox Live, or whatever the fuck PlayStation had, I don't know, I was an Xbox kid, and boot up the Burning Crusade, or Halo 3, or COD 4, or whatever multiplayer game you were knee-deep in at the time, because you are in the golden era of online gaming. Multiplayer isn't new, but it's the biggest it has ever been, with well over 1 million people online in any given big-budget AAA game at the time. The key to all of this not so much being the games themselves, but the players. Easy access communication has become a highlight of any gaming experience, for better or for worse, and the focal point of where memories of games are made has shifted. No longer is it just what the developer has created for you to experience, but now equally, or even more so, it is about the experiences you make and that are made for you by and with your fellow players. Whether that be teammates you've been thrown into team chat with, players on the other team to trash talk in post or pre-round lobbies, or that one random guy who always just happens to end up in the same dungeon group as you. While competitive play is on the rise, it is still far off from being the focus of online gaming, and instead everything is targeted towards social modes. Custom games lobbies on Halo, where I'm sure many of you remember getting message to all friends and recent players invites on Xbox Live, community servers on TF2 where people had home servers where they would regularly play on and run into the same players, dungeons and raids in World of Warcraft where you had to talk to other people to group up because Dungeon Finder and LFR weren't a thing yet. Everything, every system, every online game was focused on getting you, the player, to interact with other people. But despite all this, things changed. The start of the slippery slope was around 2009-ish. Party chat for Xbox Live was introduced, Dungeon Finder on WoW. Things like this weren't directly antisocial, but rather encouraged a significantly more asocial environment than what we saw before. Since these things were new, they did take a little while before seeing more ubiquitous adoption, and the interpersonal systems that existed remained largely intact. There were still modes in games that disallowed them. Keeping with the prior two examples, raids in World of Warcraft still required talking to other people, as LFR was not yet a thing. Certain game modes on Xbox Live forced you out of party chat, like Search and Destroy on Call of Duty. PSN didn't even have party chat at all during the PS3 era. However, a slippery slope it was indeed. A few years later, around the release of the 8th console generation, game chat was basically a barren wasteland. Xbox parties had become the go-to way to play, and the PS4 introduced a similar system for that platform. PC games held out a bit longer as text chat was still present in basically all games, but it just wasn't the same. More modern releases introduced systems that gave even less reason to communicate verbally, such as pings and quick phrases. This isn't to say that those things are bad, as they make communicating certain things much faster than typing, but they objectively diminish the social aspects of having to actually talk with your team. And so that gets us to the online gaming landscape of today. Silent online lobbies and an emphasis on the individual experience over a social one. Now that we see how we got here, I'd like to pose the question of why. Why is it that online games seem to place a decreasingly low degree of value on interpersonal interaction between its players in the modern era? Is this something intentional by game developers in general, or is it an unintended consequence of convenience? Is it the games, or is it the players? Is it both? Neither? Everything? Let's take a look. In the hours I spent researching this video, using that term rather loosely as I'm not quite convinced scrolling through various online forums and asking people for anecdotes and opinions really qualifies as research, but it's good enough for my purposes, I've found that yes, indeed there is a perception that games are becoming less social. The most common things I see cited from users being diminished friends lists relative to a supposed golden era that took place roughly between the years of 2004 to 2009, generally only speaking to and playing with real-life friends or a small group of online friends, and an aversion to wanting to speak online due to toxicity from other players, this last one being especially commonly expressed by women alongside frequent complaints of sexual harassment and general creepiness, something I'm sure we've all witnessed or experienced, although I certainly hope not perpetrated. Feature-wise, many players place blame on the popularity of matchmaking systems over server browsers, which have been more or less tossed aside, and it's not hard to see why. Back when community servers were the go-to, it wasn't uncommon to have to wait in a queue to join and actually play the game. With the popularity of direct matchmaking systems, downtime was cut down to a fraction of what it may have been before. Naturally, gamers seem to prefer the direct match-made games because it let them, well, play more. Go figure. The unfortunate side effect of this, however, is that players are far less likely to encounter each other repeatedly compared to community servers. Who are you more likely to interact and make friends with? Someone you see on a regular or semi-regular basis, or someone you see once or twice and then likely never again? This problem has been particularly exacerbated in recent years due to a multitude of factors, such as the increased population size as gaming has become one of the most popular hobbies in the world, features in MMOs like Cross-Realm Dungeon Finder in World of Warcraft, and game lobbies disbanding after every match in many modern first-person shooters for the sake of skill-based matchmaking. At least in older games with matchmaking systems, there used to be an ability to stay in the same lobby with the same players, but even that seems to have fallen to the wayside. We have access to a larger pool of players than ever, but despite and even partly in spite of that, we are all interacting less and less. As time has gone on, there has been less of a focus on having to directly communicate with teammates or other players in games as well. We've seen the widespread implementation of ping systems in many modern shooters like Apex Legends, Rainbow Six Siege, and even the upcoming Halo Infinite, which, while certainly convenient and useful, undoubtedly make it far less necessary to verbally communicate with other people. Hell, in some games like Deep Rock Galactic, pings are so useful that they generally entirely replace direct communication. Even more significantly, off-platform social interaction has become standard. As I mentioned before, in around 2009-ish, when Party Chat was introduced to Xbox Live, lobbies went from the only way to talk to dead silent virtually overnight. On PC, we've seen tons of different VoIP software come and go throughout the years, from Ventrilo to TeamSpeak to Mumble, Skype, and now, most prevalently, Discord. In general, it seems people are far more focused in just playing games with people that they're already friends with rather than roll the dice on whether or not people they speak to in-game are going to be worth talking to. In the original version of this script, there was going to be a segment here about skill-based matchmaking and negative competition and numbers and data and philosophical concepts and peer-reviewed studies and polling and before I knew it, this started turning from a YouTube video into a research document, all so I could just arrive at the conclusion many of us have already come to by ourselves. While yes, there are a million and one reasons that factor into the equation of why are games less social now, virtually all of them point back to one key problem that has become a mainstay in nearly all gaming communities, to the point where it isn't even considered problematic by many and is just acknowledged as the status quo. I'm talking about toxicity. While many of us, myself included, have fond memories of the blood sports associated with old school game lobbies, that level of persistent negativity and, well, cancer just isn't for everyone. In fact, it's so much not for everyone that it's straight up the main reason why people don't want to talk in game chat anymore. Back when this video more resembled a research study and I made the baffling decision to try and include hastily put together Excel charts composed of independent polling I conducted myself, out of the 4 major inclusive categories I identified as leading causes for people avoiding team chat, toxicity accounted for over a third of responses. While many developers have made attempts to curb toxicity in their games, such as chat filters and bans, toxic players always find a way around these, and bans do little to discourage this kind of behavior. The unfortunate reality of the situation is that toxicity has become the norm and is just an expected part of the gaming experience. Worse still, the existence of toxic behavior tends to breed more toxicity. It's self-sustaining. Suffice to say, once a community becomes toxic, it stays that way, and the only way to keep that from happening is aggressively purging bad actors from it before it's too late. One key holdover from the original version of this script is the concept of the paradox of tolerance. Essentially, if a society is tolerant without limit, its ability to be tolerant is eventually seized or destroyed by the intolerant. As online communities are often a microcosm of society or even small-scale societies in their own, this concept can be applied to gaming through toxic behavior. Early online social interaction had a laissez-faire approach to communication, and toxicity was generally tolerated as most devs either didn't know about it or didn't think it was that big of a problem and was perpetrated by a vocal minority. However, as years went on, more and more non-toxic players were driven out of these spaces by increasingly unwelcome environments, jumping ship to third-party communication platforms or private chats. As a result, all that remains in game chat are these toxic players, or, as predicted by the aforementioned paradox, the intolerant. So, what can we do with this information? How do we fix the problem of toxicity in online spaces? How do we, as a community, make gaming a more open and welcoming space for everyone to have more fun? The answer is actually quite simple. Do not allow it in the first place. Be intolerant of intolerance. The only way to maintain a healthy community is to treat the cancer early, before it grows. One of the best examples of this that I'm aware of is the game Deep Rock Galactic. In my 124.5 hours logged on Steam, all of which has been spent in multiplayer over the course of nearly 3 years, I have encountered exactly one toxic player. Just one singular person. And I've wondered for a while why that is. I've asked around, made forum posts, and lots of the suggestions I've seen are certainly true, at least on some level. The game has no incentives to behave in a toxic manner. Players, even in multiplayer, can mostly solo everything if they're half decent. It's an entirely cooperative game, and of course, rock and stone. While all of these things factor in, I think the largest reason why the community is non-toxic is tautological. It's not toxic because it isn't. Much in the same way toxic behavior is self-perpetuating, so is the opposite. Players who have managed to find a space away from those kinds of people want to keep it that way, and any bad actors are swiftly pushed out. In Deep Rock Galactic, you lose nothing for kicking a toxic player or quitting a match with toxic players in it. You are not put at a disadvantage for losing that player, and you don't get any sort of penalty for quitting a match. One reply that I received that I liked a lot when I asked this question to the Deep Rock subreddit more or less directly touched on this. It doesn't cost you anything to boot an asshole, nor does it cost much to leave a game if the host is the tool. If you're toxic in DRG, you'll inevitably find yourself stuck playing alone. Ultimately, the ability to be social in games is determined by the quality of the community that we, the players, create. While there are certainly other factors that have diminished the social aspects of games over the years, they all pale in comparison to the problems that have been created by gamers. We can't wait for game developers to fix this problem for us, it is up to us to fix it for ourselves. Thanks so much for watching. If you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation, be sure to leave it in the comments. Like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, and as usual, subscribe to the channel if you think you can tolerate seeing more of my stuff.